Welcome to a world where the spotlight burns bright, but the faces in it aren't always who you think. Today, we're going to dive into the wild, unbelievable, and sometimes downright bizarre tales of rock and roll imposters, where legends are mimicked, identities are borrowed, and the line between tribute and trickery is pretty razor thin. From fake superstars sneaking into wrestling rings and conning fans, to imposters scamming their way through hotels, and even a man who built a career out of impersonating a rock icon. These stories prove that in the world of music, you can't always trust your eyes, your ears, or even your backstage pass. Strap in for a compilation of where every encore could be a con and every legend might just be a lookalike. Former wrestler Bret Hart recently appeared on the Dark Side of the Ring Unheard podcast, and he discussed an encounter he had with a man claiming to be Sammy Hagar. Hart recalled being on a plane stating, "I remember Adrian Adonis, another wrestler, was in front of me and right in front of my seat, and I was talking to some guy. He's sitting right beside me. He had on kind of like a rock and roll jacket, almost like one Jimmy Hart would have worn. He's all excited. He goes, 'You guys are wrestlers, aren't you? WWE wrestlers?' I go, 'Yeah, we're wrestlers,' and start talking to him about wrestling. I asked what he did, and he goes, 'I'm a rock and roll singer. I'm Sammy Hagar.' Hart said that he knew Hagar's music, but he had no clue what he looked like. This caused some confusion during a limo ride to Madison Square Garden, where Jim Neidhart, Hart, and the fake Hagar ended up in the same car, with Hart adding, 'I'm sitting beside Jim,' and Jim kept going, 'That's not Sammy Hagar.' I go, 'What do you mean it's not Sammy Hagar? It looks like it could be Sammy Hagar. Why wouldn't it be Sammy Hagar?' I said, 'Have you ever seen Sammy Hagar?' And then Jim goes, 'Well, look at his watch. He's got a Timex watch. Sammy Hagar wouldn't wear a Timex. He'd be wearing a Rolex. It's not him.' Adrian then proceeded to hand a dollar bill to the Sammy Hagar imposter backstage, who proceeded to snort a line off of it. It was at that point Jim was convinced it was the real Sammy Hagar. The imposter somehow even managed to get himself invited to the ring, greeting wrestling fans before a match between Dan Spivey and Paul Christie. Unlike Hart, many in the crowd who were probably Van Halen fans quickly realized it wasn't the actual Sammy Hagar and began booing.
Lead singer for Van Halen, ladies and gentlemen, Sammy Hagar.
Stage, recalling, he said, "I know Sammy Hagar and you're not Sammy Hagar." And everyone just jokingly slapped Hagar and started hitting him, and then he walked right out of the crowd. The bosses of WWF were not pleased with to have somebody introduced to Sammy Hagar when he wasn't. So a month before Ozzy Osbourne released his 1991 album No More Tears, a man from England was arrested in the St. Louis area, claiming to have been the son of Ozzy. The man, whose name was Austin Osbourne, was arrested for skipping out on the bill at a restaurant and a nightclub. Lewis claimed he was in town to set up dates for a band in which he played and sang in. The police, of course, and even his lawyer believed the story, with his lawyer telling the St. Louis Dispatch, "Yeah, I believe his story. I don't have any proof, blood tests, or anything." The nightclub where he skipped out on the tab was interviewed for the story, who said they were told that Ozzy Osbourne's son was coming into play and they wanted personal service. When Austin went to pay the bill, he claimed he didn't have his wallet as it had been stolen, and the nightclub owner decided to press charges against him. When reached for comment, Ozzy claimed the man was in fact not his son. Moving on to our next story, a man named Kevin Eckenrod was arrested in 2003 for impersonating guitarist Mark Tremonti of Creed. Eckenrod bore little resemblance to Tremonti and was 11 years older. The imposter spent as much as a year posing as the guitarist, staying in hotels around Clearwater, Florida, getting free food and drinks from people, while also giving out autographed photos of himself, bedding women, and racking up huge bar and restaurant tabs. What's funny is that he was arrested more than once for impersonating Tremonti, and prior to that, MTV reported that Eckenrod once claimed to be the son of New York Yankees owner George Steinbrenner. Eckenrod's first arrest while impersonating the Creed guitarist happened after a hotel employee became suspicious when he saw the impersonator was surrounded by 30 adoring fans. Eckenrod ordered nearly $200 in drinks and charged them to a room he wasn't even staying at. He did come clean to the police, though, claiming he was not Tremonti, and as a result, he spent nearly 2 weeks in jail for obstruction and defrauding an innkeeper. According to MTV, he never learned his lesson, as the day he was released from jail, he returned to the same beach, and he was soon scamming once again. His second arrest happened when he was impersonating Tremonti, of course, and he met a woman who invited him back to her house, where he stole her credit card and racked up over $1,000 in charges, including clothing, hotel rooms, foods, as well as drinks. The woman ended up running into the imposter about a week later and called the police. MTV reported that upon Eckenrod being arrested again by the police, he told them, "It's my hustle. I'm a stone-cold alcoholic and it's my way of getting drinks and a place to stay. This is getting old, but you have to admit, I do look like the guy from Creed." Fast forward to December of 2003, it was reported that he was sentenced to 20 months in prison as part of a plea deal. As for whether the real Mark Tremonti ever commented on the case, well, his lawyer did read a statement that said, "My client was very concerned about this and he wanted to make sure the case was thoroughly prosecuted." Then fast forward to 2007 and Eckenrod was in the news once again, arrested for impersonating Tremonti. The police claimed Eckenrod received $20,000 in care at a Sarasota Memorial Hospital under a fake identity. He pled 2 counts of third-degree theft.
My relationship with Nikki Sixx is a solid, good friendship, and we have great communication between each other. I love Bret Michaels and he loves me. After 3 weeks of talking back and forth, he said he was falling in love with me.
In 2021, a Motley Crue and Poison fan named Tina appeared on the Dr. Phil show and claimed she had married Poison frontman Bret Michaels, and she was also in a serious friendship with Nikki Sixx of Motley Crue. Her entire relationship with the musicians would be through text. She had never video chatted with either of them or met them in person. She had also claimed to have sent both rock stars money. She claimed that she had never video chatted or met the rock stars in person because their lives are so heavily controlled by their management. It was during Tina's appearance on the show Dr. Phil poked holes in her story and reviewed the text she shared with the supposed rock stars. Even the real Nikki Sixx and Bret Michaels appeared on the show later on in the episode to tell Tina she'd been tricked. Nikki Sixx, feeling bad for her, offered Tina to come to a Motley Crue show free of charge. Moving on to our next story. On May 16, 1977, a man was arrested at the Hartsfield Airport in Atlanta for public drunkenness and pulling a knife. The man had created quite the commotion and attracted a pretty big crowd. The police report described the man as having long blonde hair and having the name Robert Plant. Immediately following the arrest, the Associated Press's Newswire picked up on the story and published it, claiming the man who was in police custody was Led Zeppelin's frontman. Strangely enough, the AP report neglected to mention other relevant facts in the police report, like the fact that the man who was arrested was 19 years old, he was short, he was American, he had a Michigan address, and perhaps most notable, he was in a wheelchair. Even a local radio station in Atlanta, WQXI, got wind of the story and even played a tape of the man arrested, with the DJ saying the man, and I quote, had the southern drawl of a Georgia cracker. Not long after, publications, including the ones in England, started publishing the story as well. The Associated Press, upon learning their mistake, had to issue an apology for running with the story, as did the British publications. As to whether the real Robert Plant, who was across the pond at the time in England, ever came across the story, well, he did. He was enjoying time with his family at the time of the arrest, and he was horse riding. Plant read about the story in the local papers, and according to a band spokesperson who talked to the press, Plant wasn't, I quote, appalled, pissed off, and not at all amused. It was an affront to his privacy and humanity. Despite the Associated Press's retraction, his spokesperson did take a shot at the AP, referring to the story as, and I quote, new levels of shoddy journalism by people not into what they're writing about. It's not malicious on the AP's part necessarily, but does reflect a lack of professional pride. Then in 1993, Plant gave an interview to Goldmine magazine where he brought up the incident. Goldmine asked him, "What's the best rumor you've ever heard about yourself?" To which Plant responded, "That I stabbed somebody in the Atlanta airport and I was arrested. I read it in the local newspapers in England. That was a funny one, but the usual one is like I'm having a love affair with somebody from the Bengals or something like that." With the advent of social media, imposters have become more commonplace online. Robert Plant years later had to issue a statement on his social media channels in late 2020, stating, "We've been made aware of several accounts impersonating Robert Plant. Robert would never communicate with fans personally and only communicate via his official channels. Please be alert and vigilant and stay safe." In the year 2000, it was reported that an imposter version of Frankie Goes to Hollywood had been touring America at least for several years. It should have been pretty obvious given that the imposter band was from Alabama and not England. The real Frankie Goes to Hollywood was fronted by Holly Johnson, while the imposter group was fronted by a guy named Davy Johnson, no relation. To lend legitimacy to the group, Davy contended he was the brother of Holly, who he claimed had passed away. Davy claimed that himself and guitarist Will Martin played on the group's 1984 debut album, Welcome to the Pleasure Dome. That didn't appear to be true. Spin magazine wrote at the time, there are plenty of bands on the retro circuit whose claim to authenticity is the second drummer and the lead singer's cousin on bass, but this one really takes the proverbial cake. The synth pop group Frankie Goes to Hollywood formed in Liverpool in the early 80s. The group's 1984 debut record, Welcome to the Pleasure Dome, topped the UK charts and spawned a few big hits in Relax, Two Tribes, and The Power of Love, all of which topped the singles charts in the UK, making the synth pop band the second act in UK history to have 3 #1 hits. However, the BBC almost stalled the band's career when they refused to play Relax due to its overtly sexual lyrics. Despite the controversy, it helped the group garner publicity and push the song to the top of the charts in their home country. Soon enough, the band's t-shirts took off with slogans like Frankie Say Relax and Frankie Say Arm the Unemployed. You might even remember Ross from Friends wearing one of their shirts. The band managed to put out another album in 1986, but disputes over songwriting royalties and problems with their label led to an ugly split of the group. The Imposter band, meanwhile, played more than 200 shows a year, everything from steakhouses to county fairs. The Imposter band even sold their own Frankie Says Relax t-shirts on their website for $20. Now, eventually, the antics of the Imposter band got on the radars of the real members. Frontman Holly Johnson and Mark O'Toole, both of which resided in Florida in the year 2000, hired their own attorney who learned where the Imposter band was playing and would warn the venues about the group, telling them that no original members were in the band. The Imposter group's manager thought what they were doing was perfectly legal and told Q Magazine, "These guys are a good band. I've had them playing in Singapore on New Year's Eve in front of 2,000 people and across the United States, and plenty of venues have had them back." However, the magazine did interview one booking agent who hired the band to play at Chicago's Elbow Room, who was deeply unhappy, stating, "The band I believe to have hired and the band that did show up were not the same thing. They were using the name in a very manipulative way. They definitely gave the impression they were related to the original band. I would never have them here again." Even some fans who saw the band back in their 80s heyday took their complaints to a fan site run by a man in Sweden who wrote on his website, "There is a fake Frankie Goes to Hollywood touring the USA, don't waste your dollars." Frontman Holly Johnson contacted the publication Polestar, letting them know that the version of Frankie Goes to Hollywood touring the US wasn't authorized. Once Polestar published the news, the booking agent for the Imposter band severed ties with the group, and in response, the Imposter group rebranded themselves the new Frankie Goes to Hollywood, featuring Davey Johnson. Meanwhile, some clubs and venues didn't really care, and they still continued to book the group and continued to advertise them as the original band, at least according to Spin. The group's original guitarist did get in touch with the Imposter band from time to time, and they would try to appease him by offering to sell his solo CD at their shows without taking a cut. At one point, the Imposter band managed to net an opening spot for the 80s nostalgia group A Flock of Seagulls. The group's frontman Mike Score told Spin, "The new Frankie are laughable. They're not even a passable cover band. They might as well call themselves Cletus Goes to Alabama." After becoming suspicious, Score opted to drop the group from their opening slot. It appeared the Imposter Frankie Goes to Hollywood stopped performing shows by late 2000, while the real Frankie Goes to Hollywood reunited in 2004 until 2007. That does it for today's video, guys. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again on Rock and Roll True Story sticker.